December 15th, 1945, the Arizona desert. A single gunshot echoes across the emptiness. Private Daniel Cooper lies bleeding in the sand. 21 years old, a farm boy from Iowa. Above him, a Japanese prisoner of war named Yuki Matsumoto cradles his head in her lap. Her hands are red with his blood. Her face is a mask of anguish and disbelief. 6 months earlier, Yuki had been told that Americans were monsters, that they would torture her, burn her alive, do unspeakable things before they finally killed her. The propaganda had been clear. The warnings had been absolute. Death was preferable to capture. Yet here she was watching an American soldier die because he stepped between her and a bullet, because he chose to protect her. His enemy. His lips move. Words bubble up through the blood. Not demons, he whispers, just people. I knew from the start. His hand falls. His eyes go distant. His chest stops moving, and Yuki Matsumoto screams. This is the story of how that moment came to be. How a nurse from Japan and a guard from Iowa found humanity in the aftermath of the deadliest war in history. A story about the courage it takes to see past propaganda, past hatred, past everything that tells us who our enemies should be. But to understand that December morning, we need to go back. Back to July 1945, when Yuki Matsumoto first stepped off a train into the blinding Arizona sun and expected to die. Let me take you there. July 23rd, 1945. 3 weeks after the atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. 3 weeks after Emperor Hirohito's voice crackled over radio speakers across Japan, announcing surrender in words so formal, so archaic, that many people didn't understand what he was saying. 3 weeks after the war that had consumed the Pacific for 4 years finally mercifully ended. But for Yuki Matsumoto, the nightmare was just beginning. She sat in a train car that smelled of sweat and fear and engine smoke. Around her, 17 other Japanese women huddled in silence. Nurses, teachers, translators. Women who had worked for the Imperial Army across the Pacific Islands. Women who had been captured during the final months of fighting and now found themselves prisoners of an enemy they'd been taught to fear more than death itself. The train car was hot, suffocating. Yuki pressed her face against the metal wall, trying to catch any breath of fresh air through the narrow gaps. Outside, the American landscape rolled past. Endless, alien, nothing like the Green Islands where she'd attended wounded soldiers. Nothing like her hometown near Kyoto with its rice fields and cherry trees. This was desert, brown and barren and hostile. The propaganda played in her mind like a film reel she couldn't stop. Images and words her superiors had drilled into her consciousness during training. Americans are barbarians. They will rape you, torture you, make you wish for death. Better to die fighting than to fall into their hands. She had a cyanide capsule hidden in the lining of her jacket. Many of the nurses had been given them. A way out if capture became inevitable. She'd kept it even after the Americans confiscated most of their belongings. A final insurance policy against whatever horrors awaited. Her hand moved to touch it, now feeling the small, hard lump through the fabric. Reassurance. Control. At least she could choose when and how it ended. The woman beside her, Mrs. Kimiko Hayashi, a teacher from Tokyo, was whispering a Buddhist prayer. Her eyes were closed. Her lips moved silently. She was 45 years old and had 2 daughters back in Japan. Before capture, she'd received a letter saying both girls were alive, but the city was devastated. That was 3 months ago. She had no idea if they still lived. Across from them sat Reiko Sato, 25, a teacher from Osaka. Her face was hard, angry. She refused to speak to the guards, refused to acknowledge them as human. To her, they were demons in uniforms. Nothing more. The train began to slow. The brakes screeched against metal. Through the gaps in the wall, Yuki could see buildings now. Guard towers, barbed wire glinting in the afternoon sun. They had arrived. The doors rolled open with a bang that made several women flinch. Bright sunlight poured in, blinding after hours in the dim car. Yuki raised her hand to shield her eyes. The heat hit her like a physical blow. Dry heat that sucked moisture from your skin instantly. So different from the humid Pacific Islands. So different from anything she'd known. Outside, American soldiers stood in formation. Rifles held across their chests. Guard towers rose against the blue sky, and everywhere that wire, coiled and sharp and designed to keep them contained. A voice shouted in broken Japanese, "Get out! Everyone out, form a line. Yuki was the first to step down onto the dusty ground. Her legs were cramped from sitting so long. Her muscles protested, but she forced herself to stand straight to maintain dignity even in defeat. The desert smelled different from anything she'd experienced. Dust and sagebrush, something sharp and clean. No smell of ocean salt, no smell of jungle rot or blood-soaked bandages. Just emptiness and heat and that peculiar scent of American soil. The wind carried something else too. Food cooking. Real food. Her stomach twisted with a hunger she'd been trying to ignore for days. Around her, the other women stumbled off the train. Guards barked orders in English that most of them couldn't understand. But the meaning was clear. Line up, stand straight, wait. An American officer approached with a clipboard. He was tall and sunburned, his uniform crisp despite the heat. Dark glasses hid his eyes. He spoke in clear English in a Japanese-American woman in U.S. Army uniform translated his words. The sight of that translator hit Yuki like a punch to the stomach. A Japanese woman in enemy uniform. A traitor. Someone who had chosen America over her own people. The disgust rose bitter in her throat. You are prisoners of war, the officer said through the translator. You will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. You will be given food shelter and medical care. You will work light duties. Any attempt to escape will be met with force. Do you understand? The women nodded in silence. Yuki's heart pounded. Geneva Convention. She'd heard of it. International law about the treatment of prisoners. But propaganda had taught her that Americans didn't follow such laws, that they used them as cover for their cruelty. The camp spread before them in neat rows, wooden barracks, a large building that looked like a dining hall, another that might be administration. Everything was orderly, clean, almost eerily normal. As they walked through the camp gate, Yuki noticed the guards more closely. Most were young, some barely looked old enough to shave. They watched the women with curiosity, with wariness, but not with obvious hatred, not with the sadistic hunger she'd been told to expect. One guard in particular caught her attention. He stood near the entrance to a long building, leaning casually against a post. Shorter than the others, maybe 5'9". Sandy brown hair stuck out from under his cap at odd angles. His face was covered in freckles. And when he noticed Yuki looking at him, he did something completely unexpected. He smiled. Not a cruel smile, not a mocking smile, just a simple, almost shy smile. As if to say welcome, though he had no right to welcome anyone to this place of captivity. Yuki quickly looked away, her cheeks burning. What kind of trick was this? What kind of psychological game were these Americans playing? Wait, she thought, the real cruelty will come later. When they're tired of pretending. The processing building was cooler inside, shaded from the burning sun. Female guards and medical staff waited for them. Everything moved with military efficiency. Remove your outer clothing. Medical examination. Showers. Yuki's hands trembled as she unbuttoned her stained uniform jacket. She'd worn it for weeks. Slept in it. Bled in it. Underneath her shirt was yellowed with sweat and dirt. She could feel lice crawling in her hair. The shame of it overwhelmed her. An American nurse conducted the examination. Middle-aged with kind eyes. She checked temperature, looked in mouth and ears, examined skin for diseases. Professional, detached, but not cruel. When she finished, she even smiled slightly and said something in English that might have been encouragement. Then came the showers. Yuki had expected cold water, humiliation, public washing designed to break their spirits. Instead, she was led to a tiled room with individual shower stalls, private spaces, doors that closed, and when she turned the handle, hot water poured from the pipes. Hot water. Real soap was placed in her hand. A thick white bar that smelled of lavender. Not harsh lye, not the gritty, sand-filled soap they'd used in field hospitals. Real soap. Soft and fragrant and impossibly luxurious. Yuki stood under that hot water and felt something break inside her chest. The water was almost too hot. It stung her skin, turned brown at her feet as months of grime and fear washed away. She scrubbed her hair once, twice, 3 times, working the lavender soap into thick lather, feeling the lice wash away, feeling clean for the first time in longer than she could remember. Steam filled the stall. The scent of lavender overwhelmed her senses. And despite everything she'd been taught about not showing weakness, despite all her training about maintaining composure in front of the enemy, Yuki Matsumoto began to cry. Silent tears mixed with the water streaming down her face. Her shoulders shook. Her breath came in gasps. Why? Why were they being kind? Why hot water? Why soap that smelled like flowers? It didn't make sense. Nothing made sense. When she emerged wrapped in a rough but clean towel, new clothes waited for her. Not prison uniforms as she'd expected, simple civilian clothes, a cotton dress, undergarments, socks, canvas shoes. Everything fit reasonably well. There was a mirror on the wall. Yuki barely recognized the woman looking back at her. Thinner than before the war, cheekbones sharp, eyes haunted, but clean, hair damp and hanging loose around her shoulders. Almost human again. Mrs. Hayashi emerged from another stall, also dressed in new clothes. The older woman's eyes were red from crying. They gave us soap, Mrs. Hayashi whispered in Japanese. Hot water, clean clothes. Why Yuki had no answer. She could only shake her head and follow the guards to the next station. The mess hall. The smell hit her the moment she stepped inside. Rice cooking, real white rice steaming and fluffy. Vegetables, meat, coffee. The combination of scents made her mouth water instantly, made her stomach clench with desperate, almost painful hunger. American soldiers and female guards ate at some tables. At others sat more Japanese women prisoners, earlier arrivals. They looked healthier, their faces were fuller, their movements less exhausted. A guard directed Yuki's group to a serving line. Behind a counter, cooks in white aprons stood ready with large pots and serving spoons. Yuki picked up a metal tray. Her hands were shaking. The first cook placed a large scoop of white rice on her tray. Perfect rice. Not the mixture of barley and weeds they'd eaten in the final months, not watery gruel, real properly cooked white rice. The second cook added vegetables, carrots, green beans, onions, sautéed in butter. The third added meat, what looked like pot roast in rich brown gravy. Then bread, soft rolls with butter, and finally a cup of hot coffee. Yuki stared at the tray in her hands. This was more food than she'd seen in a single meal in over a year. During the last months on Okinawa, meals had been watery soup and handfuls of rice if they were lucky. Sometimes nothing at all. The hospital where she'd worked had run out of supplies. They'd eaten whatever they could find. Grass, tree bark, things that barely qualified as food. And here in an American prison camp, she'd just been handed a feast. She sat at a table with Mrs. Hayashi and two younger women. For a long moment, no one touched their food. They simply stared at it as if it might disappear, as if it might be an illusion created by their starving minds. Is it poisoned? One of the younger women whispered. Yuki forced herself to think logically, to observe. The Americans eat the same food. It comes from the same kitchen. If they wanted us dead, there are easier ways. She picked up her fork. Her hand was still trembling. She took a small bite of rice. The taste exploded in her mouth. Perfect, fluffy, delicious rice. She closed her eyes and chewed slowly, savoring every grain. When she swallowed, she felt the warmth travel down her throat into her empty stomach. Around her, the other women began to eat. Some cried silently as they chewed. Others ate mechanically, afraid to acknowledge what was happening, afraid to feel gratitude toward their captors. Mrs. Hayashi set down her fork after just 3 bites. She pressed her hands to her face. Her shoulders shook. My daughters, she said, her voice breaking. My daughters in Tokyo are starving. The city is destroyed. They wrote me that they eat grass and tree bark. And here I sit eating beef and rice. The table fell silent. Everyone understood. They were prisoners, yes, but they were being fed better than their own families back in devastated Japan. Better than the soldiers they'd tried to save. Better than anyone in their homeland. The shame of it was almost unbearable. Yuki forced herself to keep eating. Her body needed this food. She couldn't help her parents by starving herself here. But each bite tasted of guilt. From across the mess hall, she noticed guards watching them. One was the freckled young man from earlier, the one who had smiled. He stood near the wall, arms crossed, his expression curious but not hostile. When he caught her looking, he gave a small nod. Nothing threatening, just acknowledgement. Yuki quickly looked away, focusing on her food. After the meal, the women were escorted to their barracks. The building was simple but solid, wooden walls and peaked roof. Inside, rows of bunk beds lined each side. Each bed had a mattress, a pillow, and two wool blankets folded at the foot. Yuki climbed onto an upper bunk near the back. The mattress was thin but clean. The pillow was soft. She sat on the edge, legs dangling, and looked around the room. Windows let in afternoon light. A wood stove sat in the center for heating during cold desert nights. At the end of the room was a small table with paper and pencils. The Japanese-American guard who had translated earlier spoke again. You can write letters. One per week to family in Japan. All letters will be read by censors before being sent. But you can write. One letter per week. Yuki thought of her parents in their village near Kyoto. They must believe she was dead by now. The Red Cross hadn't been able to track everyone during the chaos of the war's end. If she could write to them, tell them she was alive. But what would she say? How could she explain where she was? How could she tell them she was eating well while they likely starved? As evening approached, the women settled into their bunks. Some whispered to each other. Others wrote letters on the paper provided. A few simply lay down and stared at the ceiling, processing the impossibility of their situation. Yuki pulled the wool blanket over herself. It was rough but warm. Outside, she could hear guards walking past their boots crunching on gravel. Someone was singing in English. A slow country song carried on the wind. Then she heard a voice closer to the barracks. Clear, young, speaking to another guard. I don't know, Davis. They just look scared. My sister's about that age. Can't imagine what they've been through. Another voice laughed. You're too soft, Cooper. These are guests. Remember what they did at Pearl Harbor. The first voice again firm but calm. These women weren't at Pearl Harbor. They're nurses, teachers, not soldiers. Cooper. So that was his name. The freckled guard who smiled, who seemed different from the others. Yuki didn't understand all the English words, but she understood the tone. There was kindness in that voice, compassion she didn't expect, didn't know how to process. She pulled the blanket up to her chin and closed her eyes. Outside, the desert night fell quickly. Stars appeared in the vast sky, brighter than any stars she'd seen before. The air cooled rapidly, and somewhere in the darkness, guards patrolled the perimeter, protecting the camp from the outside world, or perhaps protecting the world from the prisoners within. Yuki's mind raced with questions and contradictions. Everything she'd been taught said Americans were cruel, barbaric, without honor. Yet today she'd been given hot water soap food to bed. Today she'd been treated with something that almost resembled dignity. The cyanide capsule was still in her jacket pocket, hanging on a hook near her bunk. She hadn't needed it, hadn't even come close to needing it. Maybe tomorrow would be different. Maybe the cruelty would begin then. But as she lay in that thin mattress bunk under a warm wool blanket, listening to the quiet breathing of 17 other women who were probably thinking the same thoughts, Yuki Matsumoto allowed herself to consider a terrifying possibility. What if everything she'd been told was wrong? The days that followed settled into a routine that felt both strange and oddly comforting. 6 in the morning, a bell rang. The women would wake, dress, make their beds with military precision. Breakfast at 6:30, oatmeal or eggs, toast with jam, coffee or tea, always more food than Yuki had seen in the final year of the war. After breakfast came work assignments. The camp commandant had made it clear that all prisoners would work. Light duties as promised. Some women worked in the camp kitchen, helping prepare meals. Others worked in the laundry. Still others tended a vegetable garden that supplied fresh produce. When Captain Reynolds, the camp doctor, learned that Yuki had been a nurse, he assigned her to the infirmary immediately. You have medical training, he said through the translator. We need skilled personnel. You'll work under my supervision, treating minor injuries and illnesses for both prisoners and guards. Can you do that? Yuki had nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The infirmary was a revelation. Clean white walls, real medical supplies, bandages, antiseptics, medicines. They even had enough morphine for pain relief, something Yuki hadn't seen since 1943. After working in field hospitals with almost nothing, watching boys die from infections that could have been prevented with basic antibiotics, this abundance was overwhelming. Captain Reynolds was a thin, serious man in his 40s. He treated Yuki with professional respect, explained procedures in simple English, watched carefully to ensure she understood, never raised his voice, never showed frustration when she made mistakes. After her first week, he said something that caught her completely off guard. "You're a good nurse, Miss Matsumoto. Your training shows. We're lucky to have you." A compliment from an American officer to a Japanese prisoner. Yuki had bowed slightly, unsure how to respond. The gesture seemed to please Captain Reynolds. He nodded and went back to his work. But not all the guards shared his professional courtesy. Sergeant Marcus Thompson made that clear from the beginning. Thompson was 38 years old, a combat veteran from the Philippines campaign. Hard eyes and a scar across his left cheek. He joined the Army in 1941 and fought his way across the Pacific, seen things that would haunt him forever. And in February 1945, on a volcanic island called Iwo Jima, his only son had been killed by Japanese machine gun fire. Tommy Thompson, 19 years old, Marine private, dead exactly 6 months when Yuki Matsumoto arrived at Camp Gila Bend. Thompson's hatred was palpable. He never spoke to the prisoners directly if he could avoid it. When he did, his voice was cold, clipped, filled with barely controlled rage. One morning during roll call, the temperature was already climbing toward 100 degrees. The prisoners stood in neat rows while guards called names and checked attendance. Thompson made Reiko Sato stand at attention in the sun for an extra 30 minutes because her posture wasn't perfect. By the end, Reiko was swaying close to heat stroke. Private Cooper stood 20 feet away guarding another section. His hands tightened on his rifle. He took a half step forward as if to intervene. Tommy. Another guard grabbed his arm. "Don't. He's your superior officer." Cooper's jaw clenched. "She's going to collapse. Then Reynolds will handle it." "Not you," and Captain Reynolds did handle it. He walked across the parade ground, his expression neutral, but his voice firm. "Sergeant Thompson, I believe this prisoner has demonstrated adequate discipline. You may dismiss her to the shade." Thompson's jaw worked. His eyes flicked to Reynolds, then to the watching guards, then back to Reiko. "Dismissed," he said through clenched teeth. Reiko stumbled toward the shade, and immediately Cooper was there, not touching her, not speaking, just quietly handing her his canteen. Yuki saw the whole thing from the infirmary window, saw Thompson's cruelty, saw Reynolds' intervention, saw Private Cooper risk his sergeant's anger to give water to a Japanese prisoner. Something was changing in her understanding. Not all Americans were the same, just as not all Japanese were the same. The propaganda had painted everyone with the same brush. Enemies were enemies, simple, clear. But here in this desert prison camp, the lines were blurring. 2 weeks after her arrival, Private Cooper cut his hand on barbed wire while repairing a section of fence. The wound was deep but clean, bleeding steadily. He came to the infirmary, wrapped his hand in a handkerchief that was already soaked red. Yuki was organizing medical supplies when he entered. She looked up, saw the blood, and immediately shifted into professional mode. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the examination chair. "Please." Cooper sat down, holding up his injured hand with a sheepish grin. "Heard you're the best for this kind of thing." Yuki carefully unwrapped the handkerchief. The cut ran along the base of his thumb, deep enough to need cleaning and proper bandaging. "Hurt?" she asked in halting English. "A bit," Cooper admitted, "but I've had worse. Farm life, you know. Accidents happen." She didn't understand all his words, but his tone was conversational. Easy. He didn't seem uncomfortable being treated by a Japanese prisoner. Didn't seem to see her as dangerous or less than human. She poured antiseptic on cotton and began cleaning the wound. Cooper winced but didn't pull away. She worked carefully, methodically, the way her father had taught her years ago in their village clinic. The antiseptic smelled sharp and clean. Her hands were steady. This was familiar ground. This was who she was beneath the uniform, beneath the label of prisoner. A nurse, a healer. "This will sting," she warned. "Already does," Cooper said. "But that's okay. Means it's working, right?" She glanced up at his face. He was smiling at her. That same genuine, almost shy smile from her first day. No mockery in it, no cruelty, just friendliness. Yuki wrapped his hand in clean white bandages, working with practiced efficiency. When she finished, she secured the bandage with medical tape and stepped back. "Done," she said. "Keep dry. Change in 2 days." Cooper flexed his fingers, testing the bandage. "Perfect. Thank you." He stood and started toward the door, then paused and turned back. "You know," he said, "I meant what I said. You were really good at this. And then he did something that would stay with Yuki for years. He gave a small, respectful bow. Not a Japanese bow. The angle was wrong, the form imperfect, but the intent was clear. Respect, recognition, one professional to another. Then he smiled again and left. Yuki stood in the empty infirmary staring at the door. Her heart was racing. She looked down at her hands, still steady, but somehow different. She had just treated an American soldier, had spoken with him, and he had shown her respect. The world she thought she understood was cracking apart piece by piece. That night, lying in her bunk, Yuki thought about everything that had happened since her arrival. The hot water, the food, the clean bed, the medical work. And most confusing of all, Private Cooper's smile. She thought about the propaganda, about the warnings, about the cyanide capsule still hidden in her jacket pocket. She hadn't needed it. Not once, maybe she thought. Maybe everything they told us was wrong. It was a dangerous thought, almost treasonous, but once it entered her mind, she couldn't get it out. Around her, other women breathed softly in sleep. Outside, guards walked their rounds. The desert night was cold and clear, and impossibly bright with stars. And somewhere in that darkness, Private Daniel Cooper was probably writing a letter home to Iowa, telling his mother about his day, about the prisoners he guarded, about how they weren't what he'd expected. October arrived in the Arizona desert, bringing cooler mornings and shorter days. 3 months had passed since Yuki Matsumoto stepped off that train, expecting death. 3 months of routine that had become almost comfortable, almost normal. That comfort terrified her more than cruelty ever could. Each morning, the same bell at 6, the same breakfast, the same walk to the infirmary where she worked alongside Captain Reynolds treating cuts and fevers and the minor ailments that plagued both prisoners and guards. The same faces, the same rituals, and increasingly the same presence. Private Cooper seemed to be assigned to infirmary guard duty with remarkable frequency. Whether by design or coincidence, Yuki couldn't say. But there he was almost daily, leaning against the doorframe, checking the perimeter, making his rounds, always finding a reason to stop by. Their conversations grew longer, more natural. Cooper would point at objects and teach her the English words. Chair, window, bandage, medicine. His pronunciation was careful, patient. When she repeated the words with her Japanese accent, he never laughed, just nodded encouragement. And Yuki, despite every warning voice in her head, found herself teaching him Japanese in return. Simple phrases. Good morning, thank you, how are you? His attempts were terrible, absolutely mangled. Ohayo gozaimasu came out sounding like Ohayo gozaimasu. The vowels all wrong, the rhythm completely off. But he tried. And when Yuki couldn't help but smile at his pronunciation, Cooper just grinned back. That bad, huh? I'm trying. Not very good at it, though. It was during one of these language lessons that the umbrella incident happened. October brought not just cooler temperatures but occasional rain. Rare in the desert but dramatic when it came. One afternoon, dark clouds gathered with surprising speed. The sky opened up and rain poured down in sheets. Yuki had been taking inventory in the storage shed behind the infirmary. When the storm hit, she found herself trapped. The shed had no roof overhang. To reach the main building meant running through a downpour. She was weighing her options when she heard boots splashing through puddles. Cooper appeared holding a large black umbrella. He didn't say anything, just offered his arm and held the umbrella over both of them as they walked back to the infirmary. The umbrella wasn't quite large enough for 2 people. Cooper angled it to keep Yuki dry, which meant his left shoulder got soaked. Water dripped from his sleeve. But he didn't complain, didn't seem to notice. At the infirmary door, Yuki turned to thank him. But Cooper was already walking away. Umbrella collapsed, rain soaking through his uniform. Can't have our best nurse getting sick, he called back over his shoulder. Our nurse. The possessive pronoun stuck with Yuki for the rest of the day. Our nurse. As if she belonged there, as if she were part of something rather than separate from it. But not everyone saw it that way. Sergeant Thompson's hatred hadn't diminished with time. If anything, it had intensified. He watched the growing familiarity between guards and prisoners with obvious disgust. His son had been dead 6 months now. The pain hadn't faded, had perhaps grown sharper with each day. These Japanese women continued to live and eat and sleep in safety, while Tommy rotted in a grave somewhere in the Pacific. One morning during roll call, Thompson found his target. Reiko Sato, still the most resistant of the prisoners, had made the mistake of not standing quite straight enough for Thompson's standards. Prisoner Sato, Thompson barked, "Stand at attention properly. This isn't a vacation camp." Reiko straightened her already rigid posture. "Not good enough. You people never learned discipline, did you? That's why you lost the war." He made her stand in the sun. 10 minutes, 20, 30. The temperature was already climbing toward 90 degrees. Reiko's face grew red. Sweat poured down her temples. Her legs began to shake. From his post, 40 feet away, Cooper watched. His jaw clenched. His hands tightened on his rifle. Corporal Davis stood beside him. "Don't even think about it," he whispered. "He's your superior officer." "She's going to collapse," Cooper said. "Then Reynolds will handle it." But Captain Reynolds was in surgery treating a guard who'd broken his arm in a vehicle accident, and Thompson showed no signs of relenting. If anything, he seemed to be enjoying Reiko's suffering, punishment for what her people had done to his son. Cooper took a step forward. Davis grabbed his arm. "Don't, you'll be court-martialed." Another step. "Cooper, seriously, don't throw away your career for this." But Cooper had already made his decision. He crossed the parade ground, his stride purposeful, but not aggressive. When he reached Thompson, he saluted smartly. "Sergeant Thompson, sir." "Permission to speak." Thompson's eyes narrowed. "What is it, Private Sir, with respect? The temperature is 92 degrees. Geneva Convention guidelines state that prisoners should not be subjected to conditions that risk serious health consequences. I believe prisoner Sato has demonstrated adequate discipline." Thompson's face went red. "Are you questioning my authority, Private Cooper?" "No, sir. Just reminding you of regulations, sir." The two men stared at each other. The entire parade ground had gone silent. Everyone watching, waiting. Finally, Thompson spoke through clenched teeth. "Prisoner Sato is dismissed. Return to your barracks." Reiko stumbled toward the shade. Cooper remained at attention, saluting. "As for you, Private Cooper, report to my office after this formation. We need to discuss your understanding of the chain of command." "Yes, sir." That evening, after his dressing down from Thompson, Cooper found Yuki still working in the infirmary. She was reorganizing medical supplies, a task that didn't really need doing. But she'd seen what happened that morning, seen Cooper risk punishment to protect Reiko. She needed to understand why. Cooper knocked on the door frame even though the door was open. "May I come in?" Yuki nodded. He entered, his movements careful, respectful of her space. "I wanted to check on prisoner Sato. Make sure she's okay after this morning." "She is resting. Mrs. Hayashi is with her." "Good. That's good." Silence fell between them. Not uncomfortable, but weighted, full of things neither knew how to say. Finally, Yuki spoke. "You had trouble with Sergeant Thompson because of Reiko." Cooper shrugged. "Just a talking to, nothing serious." "Why?" Yuki asked. "Why risk trouble for her, for us?" Cooper was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled up a chair and sat down, which surprised Yuki. Guards usually stood, maintained that professional distance. But Cooper sat like they were equals, like they were just two people having a conversation. "My mom wrote me something," he said. "After my cousin Stephen died at Tarawa, she said that war makes it easy to hate, easy to see people as less than human. But the hard thing, the brave thing, is to keep seeing their humanity even when everything tells you not to." He looked at Yuki directly. His eyes were serious, sad. "Reiko didn't kill my cousin. She didn't bomb Pearl Harbor. She's just a person who got caught up in something bigger than herself, same as me, same as all of us." Yuki felt something shift in her chest, a crack in the wall she'd built. "Your cousin died?" she asked quietly. "In the war," Cooper nodded. "Stephen, and my Uncle Robert at Pearl Harbor. First day of the war for us." The words hit Yuki like a physical blow. His family, his blood, killed by Japan. And yet he smiled at her, brought her coffee during late shifts, protected prisoners like Reiko from Thompson's hatred. "I'm sorry," Yuki whispered. "So sorry." "Not your fault," Cooper said gently. "You weren't there. You were just trying to help people, being a nurse. But my people did it, my country." Cooper stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the desert turning gold in the evening light. "You know what Stephen wrote in his last letter home? Before Tarawa. He said he hoped that when the war ended, we'd remember that the Japanese soldiers were people too, that they had mothers and sisters and dreams just like us. That hatred was what started the war, and it shouldn't be what we carried forward after it ended. He turned back to face her, so I guess I'm trying to honor that. Trying to see you as he would have wanted me to, as people, not as enemies. Yuki's vision blurred with tears. She blinked them away quickly. Crying in front of this American guard felt like weakness, like betrayal of her own people. But Cooper just smiled that gentle smile. It's okay to feel complicated about all this. I do too. Every day. He moved toward the door. Paused. Good night, Miss Matsumoto. See you tomorrow. After he left, Yuki sat in the empty infirmary for a long time. The revelation about Cooper's losses changed everything. He wasn't naive, wasn't ignorant of what Japan had done. He knew he'd paid the price personally, and he chose kindness anyway. That night, lying in her bunk, Yuki stared at the ceiling and thought about courage. She'd always believed courage meant fighting, dying for your country, never surrendering. But maybe real courage was something different. Maybe it was choosing to see humanity in your enemy, choosing compassion when everything justified hatred, choosing to protect rather than punish. Maybe Private Cooper was the bravest person she'd ever met. The weeks that followed brought a new routine. Cooper volunteered for outside work details whenever possible. Garden maintenance, supply pickups, anything that required escorting prisoners beyond the main fence. Davis noticed. You trying to rack up overtime pay or something? Cooper just shrugged. Somebody's got to do it. But they both knew the real reason. Thompson's anger toward the prisoners was growing, not diminishing. Other guards were starting to echo his sentiments. If something happened on an outside detail, if civilians from town decided to take matters into their own hands, Cooper wanted to be there, wanted to make sure the prisoners were protected. Late November arrived. The Americans had a holiday called Thanksgiving. Yuki didn't understand it at first. Why give thanks in the aftermath of such a devastating war? What was there to be grateful for? But the guards were excited. For weeks they talked about it. Turkey and stuffing, cranberry sauce, and pumpkin pie. Terms that meant nothing to Yuki, but clearly carried deep significance. Then came an announcement that changed everything. The camp commandant gathered everyone in the mess hall, guards and prisoners together. This Thursday is Thanksgiving, he said, an American tradition where we give thanks for what we have, even in difficult times. This year we're doing something different. There will be no separation between guards and prisoners for this meal. We eat together, at the same tables, as human beings who have survived a terrible war and are trying to build a better peace. The room fell silent. Yuki felt Mrs. Hayashi grip her hand. Some of you won't like this, the commandant continued. I understand that. The wounds are fresh, the losses are real. But if we're going to move forward as a nation, as a world, we have to start somewhere. We start here. We start with the meal shared as equals. Thanksgiving Day arrived cold and clear. The mess hall had been decorated with paper turkeys and autumn leaves. Someone's children back home had drawn them. Little stick figure pilgrims and Native Americans celebrating together. The irony wasn't lost on Yuki. Americans celebrating a meal where former enemies broke bread together, just like today. The food was extraordinary. Multiple turkeys, golden brown and glistening, stuffing that smelled of sage and butter, cranberry sauce, tart and sweet, mashed potatoes whipped with cream, green beans, fresh rolls, mishimon, and pies. So many pies. Pumpkin apple pecan, more food than Yuki had seen in her entire life. She found herself sitting across from Cooper and Davis. The plate in front of her held a mountain of food, her stomach clenched with hunger and guilt in equal measure. You've never had turkey before, right? Cooper asked, gesturing to the roasted bird. Try it. This is real American Thanksgiving. Yuki cut a small piece. The meat was tender, flavorful. Nothing like anything she'd tasted before. Despite her intention to remain neutral, she smiled. Good, Cooper asked. Very good, Yuki admitted. Around them, something remarkable was happening. Guards and prisoners were talking, laughing even. Davis was trying to teach Mrs. Hayashi how to say pass the potatoes in English. She mangled the pronunciation so badly that everyone at the table laughed, including her. Even Reiko Sato, who had resisted every friendly gesture for months, smiled when she tasted pumpkin pie for the first time. Just a small smile quickly hidden. But Yuki saw it. The barriers were crumbling. Slowly, painfully, but crumbling nonetheless. Captain Reynolds stood up, glass raised. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "today we give thanks for peace, for life, for the opportunity to rebuild what war destroyed." He paused, looking around the room. "This war taught us to hate. But sitting here today, I see something different. I see people, just people, trying to survive, trying to find meaning in tragedy, trying to move forward." His voice grew stronger. "So I'm thankful for that, for this moment, for the reminder that even in our darkest hours, humanity can shine through." He raised his glass higher. "To peace, to the future, to all of us." The room echoed with the toast, English and Japanese voices mingling. "To peace," Yuki raised her glass of water and drank. And as she looked around that decorated mess hall at guards and prisoners eating together, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. But hope is a fragile thing, easily crushed. December brought letters from home. The Red Cross had finally established reliable mail service from occupied Japan. Not everyone received letters, but those who did found themselves facing a new kind of torment. Mrs. Hayashi received a letter from her eldest daughter. She read it aloud one evening in the barracks, her voice breaking with every word. "Mother, we are so relieved to know you are alive. Tokyo is destroyed. Our house burned in March. We live in a shelter made from scraps. We eat once a day, if we are lucky, sweet potatoes and thin soup. Father's health is very poor. He cannot work anymore. And Mother, I must tell you, Akane died last month. Starvation. She was so thin at the end. So thin." The room fell silent. Akane, 23 years old, dead from hunger, while her mother sat in an American camp eating 3 meals a day. Outside, the smell of dinner drifted from the mess hall. Fried chicken tonight. The guards had been excited about it all day. Mrs. Hayashi set down the letter. Her hands shook. "I eat 3 meals a day while my daughter starved to death. What kind of mother am I?" "You could not save her from here," Yuki said gently. "Starving yourself would not have fed her." "I know," Mrs. Hayashi whispered. "But the guilt, I find myself grateful to be here. Grateful to be a prisoner." "What does that make me?" No one had an answer for that. Yuki received her own letter a week later. Her mother's handwriting was shakier than she remembered. The paper was thin, poor quality. But the words were there. "My dearest Yuki, we wept with joy to learn you survived. We feared you had died in Okinawa. The village has suffered much. Many young men never returned. Food is scarce, but we manage. Your father works in the fields when his strength allows. We think of you every day. Please stay strong, daughter. We pray for your return. Food is scarce, but we manage." Her mother's careful way of saying they were barely surviving. Your father works when his strength allows. He was ill, probably malnourished. That night, dinner was fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and apple pie for dessert. The chicken skin was crispy, the meat juicy and tender. The pie crust flaked apart under Yuki's fork. Sweet and tart at once, warm and fragrant with cinnamon. And all she could think about was her father, thin and weak, eating watery rice gruel if he had rice at all. She forced herself to eat. Her body needed the nutrition, but every bite tasted like betrayal. While the prisoners wrestled with guilt, danger was brewing beyond the camp fence. 20 miles away in the town of Gila Bend, American men gathered in bars and talked about their sons who wouldn't come home, about the enemy who had started it all, about justice. Henry Walsh was 55 years old. His son William had died at Okinawa on June 12, 1945, 20 years old. Had his whole life ahead of him. Robert Jennings was 52. His son Robert Jr. had died at Iwo Jima on February 23rd, the day they raised the flag. He hadn't lived to see it. These men drank together, mourned together, and slowly their grief fermented into something darker. Those Japanese women at the camp, Walsh said one night, his words slurred with whiskey. "They're eating our food, sleeping safe, while my boy rots in a grave somewhere in the Pacific." Jennings nodded. "Government says Geneva Convention. Says we have to treat them humane. But they didn't treat our boys humane. Tortured them, starved them, worked them to death. Someone should do something about it." Another man muttered. Walsh and Jennings looked at each other. A silent understanding passed between them. "Maybe someone will," Walsh said. Back at the camp, Sergeant Thompson was having his own dark thoughts. He'd watched Cooper volunteer for yet another outside work detail, watched him smile at the Japanese prisoners, treat them like they deserved protection. Thompson pulled Cooper aside one evening after shift change. "We need to talk private." "Yes, sir." "You are getting too friendly with the prisoners." "Sir, I'm following orders, treating them according to Geneva Convention guidelines." Thompson stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. "My son was 19 years old when he died, Cooper. 19. Japanese machine guns tore him apart while he screamed for his mother. So don't you dare tell me about Geneva Convention guidelines." Cooper stood his ground. "I'm sorry about Tommy, sir. Truly sorry. But hatred won't bring him back." Thompson's face went red. "Watch yourself, Private. Men in town are angry. They're watching that camp, watching those prisoners. And if something happens on one of these outside details, I'd hate for you to be caught in the crossfire because you were too busy protecting the enemy." He walked away, leaving Cooper standing alone in the cold night air. Cooper reported the conversation to Captain Reynolds the next morning. Reynolds listened carefully, his expression grave. "Thompson's right about one thing. There is anger in town. I've had complaints from civilians. Some wanting to know why we're coddling prisoners. Are they in danger, sir? Not inside the camp, but on outside details, be vigilant. If you see anything suspicious, any civilian is approaching, you get those women back inside the fence immediately." "Yes, sir." Reynolds looked at Cooper for a long moment. "Why do you keep volunteering for these details, Private? You could request easier duty. Desk work, something that doesn't put you in potential danger." Cooper thought about Stephen's last letter, about his mother's words, about Yuki's smile when she tasted her first turkey. Because someone needs to, sir. And I'd rather it be me than someone who might not protect them if things go wrong. Reynolds nodded slowly. "You're a good man, Cooper, but be careful. Martyrs don't get to see the peace they died for." "I'm not trying to be a martyr, sir. Just trying to do what's right." Mid-December arrived. The days were short now, the nights cold. Work details continued despite the chill. A storage shed near the access road needed cleaning and reorganization. 6 women were selected for the job: Yuki Matsumoto, Mrs. Hayashi, Reiko Sato, 3 others. Guards assigned were Private Cooper and Corporal Davis. The morning of December 15th dawned clear and cold. 45 degrees at sunrise, expected to climb to 70 by afternoon. Yuki, dressed in her work clothes, gathered cleaning supplies, walked with the other women across the cold desert morning toward the shed. The air was crisp, sharp in the lungs. The rising sun painted the distant mountains gold and purple. Their breath made small clouds in the cold. Sand crunched under their shoes. Cooper and Davis walked ahead, rifles slung casually over their shoulders. Davis lit a cigarette. "Christmas is next week. You get your mom's package yet?" "Yesterday," Cooper said. "Cookies and a new scarf. She knitted it herself. Your mom still thinks you're in Alaska." Cooper laughed. "She worries. Can't help it." They reached the shed. It was a long wooden structure filled with tools and spare parts. The women went inside and began their work, sweeping, organizing, creating inventory lists. Cooper and Davis stood outside, relaxed. It was a routine detail, nothing dangerous, just maintenance work on a Saturday morning. Davis smoked his cigarette and talked about his plans for Christmas leave. Cooper leaned against the shed wall and thought about his mother's cookies waiting in his bunk. Inside, Yuki worked alongside Mrs. Hayashi, organizing rusted tools into piles. Salvageable, unsalvageable. Simple work that left her mind free to wander. She thought about Thanksgiving, about the letters from home, about Cooper's uncle and cousin, about how everything she believed had turned out to be wrong. Cooper called through the door. "Where should we put the broken tools?" Yuki walked to the doorway. "Separate pile on the left. We will dispose of them later." "Good, thank you." Their eyes met for just a moment. He smiled. She almost smiled back. It was a peaceful morning. Routine. Safe. The kind of day where you let your guard down, where you think about what you'll have for lunch, where you forget just for a moment that the world was recently at war. That moment of forgetfulness would cost everything. In the distance, barely audible at first, came the sound of an engine. A truck on the access road. Moving fast, too fast for a routine delivery. Davis heard it first. You hear that? Cooper straightened up, his hand moving instinctively to his rifle. "Yeah, Truck approaching, moving fast. We expecting supplies today? Not on Saturday. The civilian truck appeared over a rise, bouncing over the rutted dirt road, dust trailing behind it, coming straight toward them. Cooper's training kicked in. Stay alert, Davis. Inside the shed, Yuki heard the change in Cooper's voice, heard the truck getting closer. Some instinct, some remnant of her time in war zones made her stomach clench with sudden fear. She moved to the door, looked out, and saw two men with rifles climbing out of the truck 30 yards away. Saw the hatred on their faces. Saw Cooper step between them and the shed door. Saw everything about to change forever. The truck skidded to a stop 30 yards from the shed. Dust billowed in its wake. Two men jumped out, both armed with hunting rifles. Their faces were red with anger and something else. Something that looked like grief twisted into rage. Cooper moved immediately, stepped away from the shed wall, put himself between the armed men and the door where the women worked inside. His rifle came up to a ready position. Not aiming, not threatening, but prepared. Stop right there, he called out, his voice carrying authority despite his youth. This is military property. Identify yourselves and state your business. The older of the two men raised his rifle. Get out of the way, boy. This doesn't concern you. Corporal Davis moved to flank them, his weapon also at ready. Sir, you need to leave this area immediately. You're trespassing on a military installation. The older man was Henry Walsh, 55 years old, a face weathered by Arizona's sun and grief. His hands shook slightly as he gripped his rifle. Not from fear, from rage barely contained. My son died at Okinawa, Walsh shouted. William Walsh, 20 years old, killed by these yellow devils. And you're here protecting them, feeding them, treating them like guests. The younger man was Robert Jennings, 52, former factory worker. His son had died at Iwo Jima, the same battle where Sergeant Thompson's boy had fallen. Small-town grief amplified by shared loss. We're here for justice, Jennings added. Justice the government won't give us. Inside the shed, Yuki heard the shouting, heard the words even if she didn't understand all the English. The tone was unmistakable. Hatred, violence, death. This was it. This was what she'd been waiting for since that first day. The cruelty, the torture, the execution. It had just taken longer to arrive than expected. She grabbed her medical bag. Pure instinct, training overriding fear. Someone was going to get hurt. She needed to be ready. Mrs. Hayashi gripped her arm. What's happening? Trouble, Yuki whispered. Stay back. Stay quiet. But Reiko Sato moved toward the door, her face pale but determined. If they're going to kill us, I want to see them. I won't die cowering in the dark. Outside, the confrontation escalated. Cooper's voice remained steady. Sir, I understand you're angry. I understand your loss, but these prisoners are under military protection. I have orders to protect them, and I will follow those orders. Walsh spat in the dirt. Orders. My boy followed orders. Got him killed. These women should have died with their cities. Should have burned with Tokyo and Hiroshima. He raised his rifle higher, aiming now. Not at Cooper. At the shed. Davis immediately brought his weapon to bear on Walsh. Lower your weapon. Now, this is your final warning. Jennings swung his rifle toward Davis. Don't you dare point that at him. His son died because of them. All our boys died because of them. The situation was spiraling. 2 guards, 2 armed civilians. Math that could go bad in multiple ways. And behind Cooper, 6 women whose lives depended on choices made in the next few seconds. Cooper didn't move, didn't step aside. His body remained between the guns and the shed door. Sir, he said to Walsh, his voice quieter now, more personal. I lost family too. My uncle Robert at Pearl Harbor. My cousin Stephen at Tarawa. I know what you're feeling. Walsh's eyes blazed. Then you know why I'm here. Why this needs to happen. I know why you think it needs to happen, Cooper replied. But killing these women won't bring your son back. It won't bring any of them back. It'll just add more death to a war that's already killed too many. Jennings laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. Listen to him. Probably never even saw combat. Standing there protecting the enemy like some kind of saint. You're right, Cooper said. I never saw combat. I've been stateside the whole war. But that doesn't mean I don't understand what we're fighting for, what we fought for. And it wasn't so we could murder prisoners after the war ended. Walsh's finger moved to the trigger. Last chance, soldier. Step aside. Cooper's jaw set. His decision was made. Had been made weeks ago, really. Maybe months. Maybe from the moment he first saw Yuki's frightened face on that July morning and chose to smile instead of sneer. Then you'll have to go through me. Inside the shed, Yuki moved to the doorway despite Mrs. Hayashi's protests. She needed to see, needed to understand what was happening. She saw Cooper standing alone between angry men with guns and the women they wanted to kill. Saw his shoulders square, saw his refusal to move, and she understood. He was going to die for them. This American soldier who had lost family to Japan, who had every reason to hate, who could have stepped aside and let vengeance take its course. He was going to die protecting his enemies. No, she whispered. No, please, no. Walsh fired. The shot cracked across the desert, a warning shot that kicked up sand 2 feet to Cooper's left. Birds erupted from nearby brush. The sound echoed off the distant mountains. Next one's not a warning, Walsh shouted. Cooper didn't flinch, didn't move. Davis was yelling now. Drop your weapons. Drop them now or I will fire. But Jennings had reached his breaking point. All his grief, all his rage, all his need for someone to blame converged in this moment. He swung his rifle toward the shed door, toward where he could see movement, toward the Japanese women who represented everything that had taken his son. They don't deserve to live when our boys are dead, he screamed, and fired. Cooper saw the rifle barrel move, saw where it was pointing. Had maybe half a second to react. He moved, not away, toward, threw himself in front of the shed door with every ounce of speed and strength he possessed, arms spread wide, making himself as large a target as possible. The bullet caught him center mass, just left of his sternum. The impact spun him halfway around. His rifle clattered to the ground. His hand went to his chest, came away red. He looked down at the blood spreading across his uniform, looked up at the sky, brilliant blue and cloudless. Looked toward the shed door where Yuki stood frozen in horror. Then his legs gave out. He fell to his knees, toppled sideways into the sand. Everything happened at once. Davis fired, hitting Walsh in the leg. The older man went down screaming. Jennings dropped his rifle, hands shooting up in surrender. Don't shoot. Oh God, don't shoot. What did we do? What did we do? Sirens began wailing from the main camp. Guards were coming. Help was coming. But too late. Much too late. Yuki ran. She didn't think, didn't plan, just ran. Dropped to her knees beside Cooper's body. Her medical training took over even as her mind screamed denial. Chest wound, massive bleeding, punctured lung at minimum, possibly arterial damage. Critical, fatal. No, 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 no. Her hands pressed against the wound trying to stop the bleeding. But there was so much blood. It poured between her fingers, soaked into the sand beneath him. Stained her dress, her hands, everything. Danny, she cried, using his first name for the first time. Cooper-san, stay with me. Help is coming. You'll be okay. You have to be okay. His eyes found her face. Recognition flickered there. Relief somehow, despite the pain, despite dying in the desert sand. He tried to smile, that same gentle smile. You're okay, he whispered. Blood bubbled at his lips. Good, that's good. Don't talk. Yuki sobbed. Save your strength. The doctor is coming. Captain Reynolds will fix this. He has to fix this. But she knew. God help her, she knew. She'd seen enough wounds in her time as a nurse. This was fatal, minutes at best. Cooper's hand reached up, shaking, weak, touched her arm. Tell my mom, he gasped. Tell her I did my job, protected innocent people. You did. Yuki cried. You saved us. You saved me. Not demons, Cooper whispered. His voice was fading, growing distant. Just people. I knew. From the start. His hand fell. His eyes went unfocused. His chest stopped its labored rising and falling. Private Daniel Matthew Cooper died at 9:47 on the morning of December 15th, 1945. 21 years old. Farm boy from Iowa. He died with his head in the lap of a Japanese prisoner, a woman he'd been taught to hate, a woman he chose to protect instead. Yuki held him and screamed, a sound that came from somewhere beyond words, beyond reason. Pure anguish and disbelief and guilt and all tangled together. Mrs. Hayashi stumbled from the shed, saw the scene and gasped. Reiko emerged behind her, took one look at Cooper's body and began to weep. Even Reiko, who had resisted every kindness, who had held on to her hatred like armor, even she broke. Because an American soldier had just died protecting them, his enemies, his people's killers, and that act of sacrifice shattered every certainty they'd clung to about who the monsters were. Guards arrived, medical personnel. They pulled Yuki away from Cooper's body, though she fought them, tried to return to him, as if her presence could somehow call him back. Captain Reynolds was there within minutes. He took one look at the wound and shook his head. Nothing to be done. He'd been gone before he hit the ground. Walsh and Jennings were arrested. Both were crying now. The adrenaline and rage had drained away, leaving only the horrific reality of what they'd done. Walsh kept repeating, "I killed a soldier. I killed an American soldier. Oh God, what have I done?" The camp went into immediate lockdown. All prisoners secured. Investigation protocols activated. News would spread quickly. POW guard killed by civilians. American soldier dies protecting Japanese prisoners. It would make headlines across the country. But none of that mattered to Yuki. She sat in the infirmary covered in Cooper's blood. Her hands were red. Her dress was soaked. She stared at nothing. Saw only his face, his smile, his eyes going distant and empty. Captain Reynolds stayed with her, tried to get her to change clothes, to drink water, and to respond to questions. But Yuki was somewhere else, lost in a place where American soldiers died for their enemies and nothing made sense anymore. "I should have saved him," she finally whispered. "I'm a nurse. I should have saved him. No one could have saved him," Reynolds said gently. "The wound was immediately fatal. You know that. He died for me. I am enemy. I am Japanese. My people killed his uncle, his cousin, and he died for me. Because that's who Danny Cooper was. That's what he believed in. Why?" The question came out as a wail. Why would he do that? Reynolds was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that would stay with Yuki forever. Because he chose to see your humanity instead of your nationality. He chose to protect life instead of taking it. He chose to be the person his mother raised him to be, even when it cost him everything. The funeral was held 5 days later, December 20th, cold morning with clear skies. The entire camp attended, prisoners and guards alike. Captain Reynolds had made it clear that anyone who wanted to pay respects could. Most did. Even those who had harbored anger toward the prisoners came, because whatever their feelings about the Japanese Cooper had been one of their own, and he'd died doing his duty. The coffin was draped with an American flag. Honor guard from his unit served as pallbearers. The chaplain gave a eulogy about sacrifice and duty and the better angels of our nature. Yuki stood with the other prisoners wearing a black armband. She wept openly, no longer caring who saw, no longer caring about maintaining composure or dignity or any of the things she'd been taught about not showing weakness. Around her, other women cried too. Mrs. Hayashi sobbed quietly into her hands. Even the guards had tears in their eyes. Davis stood at attention, his face wet. When the chaplain asked if anyone wanted to speak, Yuki surprised herself by stepping forward. Her legs felt like water. Her voice shook, but she needed to say something, needed Cooper's sacrifice to be acknowledged. She walked to the front, stood beside the flag-draped coffin, took a breath. "Private Cooper," she began in halting English. "Danny, he show me kindness when I expect hate. He treat me like human when I am prisoner." Her voice broke. She forced herself to continue. "He died protecting enemy, protecting me, woman from country that killed his family. He could hate, should hate, but he choose different." She bowed deeply, the Japanese gesture of ultimate respect and profound gratitude. "I never forget. I carry his sacrifice all my life. He teach me most important thing. People can choose good, even in war, even to enemy." She straightened, tears streaming freely down her face. "Danny Cooper is hero, real hero, not because he kill, Because he protect. Because he choose humanity over hate. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. I promise his name will live. In my family. In my heart. Forever. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to still. Then the chaplain spoke. Amen. The camp commandant announced that Private Cooper would be posthumously awarded the Soldier's Medal for heroism. His name would be honored. His family would receive the medal at a ceremony. But no medal could bring him back. No honor could undo his death. After the funeral, Yuki returned to the infirmary. Captain Reynolds had given her something. An envelope. Inside was a photograph. Cooper in civilian clothes, standing in front of a barn, Iowa farmland stretching behind him, young and smiling and alive. Keep it, Reynolds said. Remember him as he was, not how he died. That night, Yuki began writing a letter. It took her a week to complete. Multiple drafts, help from Nurse Patterson to correct her English. But finally it was done. Dear Mrs. Cooper, it began. My name is Yuki Matsumoto. I was a prisoner at Camp Gila Bend, where your son served as guard. I am writing to tell you that your son was a hero. She described December 15th. The confrontation, Cooper's choice. His final words. Your son died protecting me. Enemy person. Japanese. Your family lost people to Japan in this war. But your son chose to protect me anyway. Chose to die rather than let innocent people be murdered. She told Mrs. Cooper about the small kindnesses. The umbrella, the coffee, the respect. Because of him, I learned not all enemies are monsters. Because of him, I learned people can choose kindness in darkness. I am sorry I cannot return your son, but his sacrifice was not in vain. He changed my life. He changed how I see the world. I will remember him always. Will tell my children and grandchildren about American soldier who died for Japanese prisoner. His name will live forever in my family. With deepest respect and eternal gratitude, Yuki Matsumoto. She gave the letter to Captain Reynolds. He promised to ensure it reached its destination. Whether Martha Cooper would reply, Yuki didn't know. Didn't expect it. How could a mother forgive the people for whom her son died? But Yuki needed her to know. Needed her to understand that Danny's death meant something. 6 weeks later, a reply came. Thin paper, shaky handwriting. But the words were there. Dear Yuki, Martha Cooper wrote, thank you for your letter. It helped me understand my son's death. Helped me know he died as he lived. With compassion. Danny wrote about you in his letters home. Called you the brave nurse who survived terrible things. Said you reminded him of his sister. Said he hoped someone would protect her if she ever needed it. I grieved when the telegram came. Wept for days. But reading your words, I know he died doing what I raised him to do. Choosing kindness over hate. I do not hate you, Yuki. You are not my enemy. War took too many sons, American and Japanese. Danny chose to break that cycle. I am proud of him, and I am grateful you survived. Perhaps someday, when our countries are at peace, we can meet. Until then, know you carry my son's legacy forward. Be well, child. Martha Cooper. Yuki read the letter 3 times before she could see through her tears. This American mother, this woman who had lost her son. She didn't hate, didn't blame. She forgave. The world could change. Had to change. Because if Martha Cooper could forgive, then anything was possible. March 1946, repatriation ships were ready. Yuki Matsumoto stood on the deck of a transport vessel watching the American coastline fade into the distance. She was going home. Back to Japan. Back to her parents. Back to a country she barely recognized. In her pocket was Cooper's photograph. In her heart was his sacrifice. She was not the same person who had arrived 9 months earlier. That person had been full of propaganda and fear, and certainty about who the enemies were. This person understood that enemies were only enemies until someone chose to see them differently. The journey took 2 weeks. When the ship entered Tokyo Bay, Yuki stared at the devastated city, whole neighborhoods reduced to ash. The destruction was almost incomprehensible. This was the price of war. This was what hatred had built. But she'd also seen what kindness could build. One smile, one act of compassion, one sacrifice that rippled outward, changing everyone it touched. Her parents met her at the village station. Her mother wept. Her father stood silent, tears streaming down his weathered face. That night, she told them everything about the camp, the food, the medical work, and about Private Daniel Cooper. The world has changed, her father said after listening to it all. Everything we believed, everything we were taught. Much of it was lies. We must learn to live with new truths. I know, Father, Yuki replied. I learned that in America. The years that followed were hard but hopeful. Yuki worked as a nurse in Tokyo, helped rebuild the medical system, married a schoolteacher named Kenji, who shared her belief that Japan needed to change. They had 3 children, 2 daughters, 1 son. The son born in 1952, they named Daniel. In Japanese, Danyeru. People would ask about the unusual name. Yuki would tell them the story. Every word, every detail. The American guard who died protecting a Japanese prisoner, who chose humanity over hatred. Cooper's photograph hung in their home. On the family altar next to ancestors was a small memorial. Fresh flowers every week. Incense burned. Prayers said. Every December 15th, Yuki would gather her children and tell them about Danny Cooper, about his smile, his kindness, his sacrifice. Why did he save you if you were enemies? Young Danyeru would ask. Because he chose to see me as person, not enemy. He chose humanity over hatred. Was he brave, the bravest person I ever knew? In 1975, 30 years after the war, Yuki traveled to America with her family. U.S.-Japan relations were strong now. Former enemies were allies. She went to Iowa, to Cedar Rapids, to a farm where an elderly woman waited. Martha Cooper was 73, still strong, still graceful. When she saw Yuki, she opened her arms. They embraced, 2 women connected by tragedy and sacrifice, and the memory of a young man who changed both their lives. You kept your promise, Martha said. You remembered him. How could I forget? Yuki replied. He gave me my life. They visited Cooper's grave together, a simple stone in a small cemetery. Private Daniel M. Cooper, 1924 to 1945. He chose humanity. Yuki's children placed flowers. Young Danyeru, now 23, bowed to the grave, honoring the man he was named after but would never meet. Martha took Yuki's hand. He would be glad you lived a full life. Glad his sacrifice meant something. It meant everything, Yuki whispered. 10 years later, 1985, Yuki stood at a podium in San Francisco, a peace conference. Former soldiers, diplomats, students. Her grandson, Hiro, sat in the front row, 10 years old and listening intently. She told Cooper's story. Every detail preserved over 40 years. 40 years ago, I was prisoner of war, she said. I expected torture, found humanity, expected hatred, found kindness. She held up Cooper's photograph, faded now, but still clear. This is Private Daniel Cooper. He was 21 years old. He should have lived long life, married, had children, farmed in Iowa. But his life was cut short by hatred he refused to carry. Her voice grew stronger. I tell his story so he lives forever. So we remember that peace is always possible. We must only choose it. The applause was thunderous, but Yuki heard none of it. She was back in the Arizona desert, kneeling in the sand, holding a dying soldier who had chosen to protect her. After the speech, Hiro asked the question she'd been asked 1,000 times. Grandmother, was he really that brave? Yuki looked at her grandson, saw the future in his eyes, saw the hope that Cooper had died for. Braver than anyone I've ever known. Hiro was quiet for a moment. Then I want to be like him. Yuki smiled through her tears. Then be kind, Hiro, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. That's what Danny taught me. Today, Cooper's story lives in museums. His photograph is displayed at the National World War II Museum. The plaque reads Private Daniel Cooper, 1924 to 1945. He chose humanity over hatred. Yuki Matsumoto lived to age 88, died peacefully in 2010. Until her final days, she told Cooper's story, made sure it was written down, preserved, passed on. Because some stories need to be remembered, stories of people who choose kindness when everything tells them to hate. Stories of sacrifice that ripple forward through generations. December 15th, 1945. A farm boy from Iowa died in the desert protecting people he'd been taught to hate, people who represented everything he should have wanted to destroy. But Danny Cooper knew something important, knew it in his bones, in his heart. Enemies are only enemies until someone chooses to see them differently. He chose. He acted. he died. And because of that choice, Yuki Matsumoto lived, raised children, taught nurses, spread his message of humanity across decades. The bullet took 3 seconds to end Cooper's life, but his sacrifice has lived for 80 years. That's the power of choosing humanity. That's the legacy of a true hero. Not the kind who kills enemies, the kind who dies protecting them, the kind who sees a frightened woman in a prison camp and chooses to smile instead of sneer, who brings coffee during late shifts, who steps between bullets and innocent people. The kind who, in his final moments, doesn't curse his fate or rage at injustice, who simply whispers that enemies aren't demons, just people. And he knew that from the start. That knowing changed the world. One person at a time, one story at a time, one choice at a time. Danny Cooper never married, never had children, never inherited that Iowa farm. But his legacy lives in Yuki's children, in her grandchildren, in everyone who hears his story and chooses kindness over hatred. In you, perhaps, if this story has touched your heart. Every day we face that choice: hate or humanity, fear or kindness, enemy or person. Danny Cooper made his choice on a cold December morning in 1945. What will yours be?